Welcome into WarUp on the WPIAL. Greg Warnock, Jeff Upson with you here, recapping the POWERade Tournament, also the Trojan Wars, and then we got some matches to talk about as well from this past week. And then we also look ahead. We have several tournaments coming up this weekend. Just about every WPIAL school wrestling here this weekend, except for those in Allegheny County, but several of the county tournaments taking shape otherwise. So a lot to go over. Jeff, unfortunately, I wasn't able to be there at POWERade Live. It's the first time, and I couldn't even tell you how many years, due to being sick, but still following along online. So obviously, we'll be trusting in your judgment as far as some of the brackets. So let's dive right in. And at 107 pounds, the WPIL had one medalist at 107, Tanner Mazenko of Cannon McMillan. He finished in sixth place. For the state of PA, we also had Dominic Deputy at Chestnut Ridge finishing fourth, Aiden Smith finishing in third place.
Well, I mean, first of all, Greg, I'm glad you're on the mend. We certainly missed you there at POWERade. It was weird not having you there and looking you up in your perch, and you and Mark Uriah there, not moving, and you just wander down. And I mean, you can remember a few years back, I got laryngitis at POWERade. You were battling with something similar and bronchitis, and I'm glad you're good for WarUp. Really the main thing is WarUp. Watching POWERade is kind of secondary, right? And you had said like you're going to trust in my judgment for POWERade. I mean, you watch the matches, so you're allowed to make a judgment too. But 107, shout out Dom Deputy, man. He had a phenomenal tournament. Beat Aiden Smith, who was a top seed. Does finish in fourth place after losing to Smith. But Tanner Mazenko, he had a good tournament. And if you look at it coming in, he finished where he was seated, right? He was seated sixth, finishes in sixth. Had some good wins. In fact, he had a win against Cam Baker from Burrow, which I was really excited to see that one. That was early in the wrestlebacks. Ended up beating him. Beat a tough freshman from Lake Highland Prep, Liam Davis, and then lost to Deputy. I was impressed with Mazenko, but this was a tough weight just from top to bottom. A lot of young guys, a lot of tough guys all across the nation were here. But Mazenko showed, hey, he's a force to be reckoned with. I think we saw that at the King and Mountain, even though he ended up in third there. Dom Deputies just looked really, really good. Not a WPIAL guy, but certainly a friend of the show. He looked really good this tournament. So, but overall, Mazenko, I think this is a good step in the right direction for him. I think he's getting settled into 107 and kind of the high-level competition that we're seeing already this year.
Well, and we talked about him being one of the top-ranked AAA guys, and how is he going to do being that top guy? And you're seeing it here, right? I mean, he's been able to step up and wrestle tough, and we'll see how that carries into here this coming weekend with Tri-County and obviously the rest of the way. But he's got a shot, an opportunity to be a potentially state champ. So to do that, he's got to come up big in these big matches, and he wrestled well, POWERade. 114 pounds for the state of PA. It was an all-PA final. Bo Bassett of Bishop McCourt was your champ, beat Louis Gill of Reynolds. For the WPIL, they did have two medalists, Connor Smith of Seneca Valley and Tyler Capusta of Franklin Regional. They finished seventh and eighth, respectively, with Smith beating Capusta 1-0 in that seventh-place match.
Yeah, this was a weird weight, man, because it was almost like the King of Mountain repeated, except Luke Willishell wasn't on the medal stand. So Luke Willishell had a tough tournament. He went 2-2, which for a state runner-up and a guy who was seated fifth, and I think a lot of folks were expecting him to do better than 2-2 here, but he had a tough draw, man. He had Carson Brown from St. Ed's in the round of 16, I believe, and that was a really tough matchup for him. And then he lost to Dion Johnson from Homewood Flossner from Illinois. That was another tough one, 3-2. Johnson goes on to not place. And like I said, you look at the way the bracket fell, because of the way in which the matchups were, I would say almost that Connor Smith and Capusta benefited by the draw, but if you look at it, they had to go through a kind of a buzzsaw, kind of really through a meat grinder to get to where they had to. And I think Kapusta really wanted that match back with Connor Smith and was just unable to get a win. And shout out to Connor Smith, because Connor Smith, I mean, he ended up winning, I think, 6 matches total at POWERade to only 2 losses. He also lost to Carson Brown. That was an overtime match, 3-1. But he had a huge win over Carter Beck from Sagertown, which I thought was a really good win, setting up that match with Carson Brown. And then he beat Kapusta again, second time this year, 1-0. So, for a guy who hasn't been to the state tournament before, Connor Smith is wrestling like a state medalist. I'm excited to see this kind of, these triplets of Luke Willishell, Connor Smith, and Tyler Kapusta, and see where they all end up, because we know from last year with them all being down at 106, it's on any given day. These guys, you could finish 1, 2, 3, and it could be 2, 3, 1. It could be all over the place, just a matter of who shows up. And I'm excited to see it all play out. It was interesting at POWERade to see those two finish and 7th and 8th, and Luke Willishell not placing.
Do you see all 3 of those guys getting on the award stand in Hershey?
I mean, yeah, absolutely I do. I mean, you look at Willishell. I think he's capable of making a run to the state finals once again. And Connor Smith has proven he's capable. I think if Connor Smith would have made it to states last year, he probably would have medaled. Kapusta's already medaled there. And Ty's been wrestling really strong. Ty's really matured, I think, just in watching him wrestle. He's really just matured mentally and both and physically as well. Despite the couple losses to Connor Smith, I just think that shows how tough the WPIAL is, especially at 114 pounds. I mean, and then we haven't even mentioned Kai Sheptick either, right? He's there as well. He had a tough tournament. He's had a tough year. I know he's probably got to cut a pretty good amount to get down, but he lost to Carson Brown too. So Carson Brown had himself a WPIAL tournament. He knocks out a whole bunch of WPIAL guys. He beat Zach Franks from Collinsville, beat Easton Mull from Chestnut Ridge, not a WPIAL guy, but close enough. Luke Willishell, Kai Sheptick, Connor Smith, and then actually beat Jaden James from New Jersey to finish in 3rd place. So Carson Brown ran the gauntlet of WPIAL wrestlers. But yeah, to answer your question, absolutely. I think all 3 of those guys make it on the podium in Hershey.
And you talk about Kai Sheptick. I don't even think he's 100% yet. So he's going to continue to gain strength and gain steam as the season goes on. That's why I'm interested to see how he does this weekend with the Tri-County tournament. If he's a go, obviously he's had some tough matches here in December, but I think that's expected. I mean, the guy just came off a big surgery. He's been rehabbing like crazy, working his butt off to get on the mats here in December. So I think January and February, he's just going to continue to get stronger and stronger.
Well, and their schedule's not a cupcake schedule, right? I mean, my God, Waynesburg's they're at Ironman. They're at POWERade. They had some pretty intense duels, like with Canada Max. So, I mean, Kai's certainly not 100%. But I think as the year goes on and he can stay healthy, and get his motor going. Yeah, you're right. I think he'll just be another threat at 114 pounds in the WPIAL.
121, Jax Forest, the Bishop McCourt was your champ, 3-1 over Luke Lilladale of Wyoming Seminary in a big 1-versus-2 matchup. Cale Nasdi of Williamsport was 5th. Brandon Wenzel was 6th. For the WPIAL, though, Cooper Smith of West Allegheny gets on the award stand, finishing in 8th place.
Yeah, I mean, shout out Smitty, man. We had an article that we did on our top performances and kind of some breakout guys and guys that really opened our eyes. And Cooper Smith was my top pick for that, man. I mean, he looked great. And maybe talking to Coach Waters, prior to POWERade, West Allegheny hadn't had a ton of like really tough competition. So it was really hard to gauge where Cooper Smith was. I knew he was a tough freshman coming in. We know being that he was a state medalist in the PJW or youth ranks, he's going to be a good wrestler. But he's really just come out, and I was really impressed with him at 121 pounds. He beat Leo Joseph from Latrobe, who I'm a huge fan of. I think Leo Joseph is under the radar, and Cooper Smith was able to come out and get a big win over him. He also beat in his first match Dylan O'Brien from Hickory, another guy that I'm impressed with. I've got to see a lot of O'Brien, and Cooper Smith beat him up 9-2. He had a couple big wins to get to the medal. In the blood round, he beat Quentin Harding from, I believe it was Washington. Yeah, it was Washington, who's not bad at all. I'm not sure if he was nationally ranked, but he's certainly a threat to be in the top 30 in the nation. And Cooper Smith beat him. So yeah, that was huge, and he was close with Wenzel. It was a 2-1 match. That was back in the auxiliary gym. That was a really close match. I was watching that thinking, my God, Cooper Smith's going to pull it off against a state champ. But, shout out to Cooper Smith. He had a great tournament. Overall, though, the WPIAL, this Cooper Smith was not the guy I would expect to be on the medal stand at 121 pounds, Greg.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And it was definitely, one that I think sent some shockwaves, but it was a deep weight at 121. When you talk about guys like Kale Nasdio and Brandon Wenzel finishing, where they did 5th and 6th, and they had a good tournament too. Do you think Nasdio had a good solid run? So you got the top 2 guys in the nation wrestling in that weight class. It makes it fairly deep already when you look at it. 127 pounds for the WPIAL. They ended up with 3 medalists. Mason Kernan of Bethel Park finishes in 5th. Tyler Chappell of Seneca Valley in 6th. Andrew Binney of Cannon McMillan in 7th. Tons of WPIAL guys here that are solid, Jeff. We were just curious how they would all shake out with Kernan, Chappell, and Binney on the award stand. A guy like Ethan Lieben, though, doesn't make the award stand. Dominic Ferraro of Pine Richland doesn't make the award stand. So some big-time results.
I mean, I wanted this. I needed this because 127 was it was in flux, right? It was so crazy. The King of the Mountain kind of, threw things for a loop. Andrew Binney was kind of the main agitator there. Andrew Binney was just wrestling out of his mind. And to be honest with you, in that quarterfinal match with Binney and Chappell, I think a lot of people, myself included, kind of expected Binney to get a win there. He had been wrestling so well to that point, and he still wrestled well in that match. He got in a position where he got a takedown right to his back, and he ended up giving up 5. And if you give up 5 points on Tyler Chappell, I don't see you're not winning.
Good luck.
Yeah, it's just not happening, right? And that's just a testament to how good Tyler Chappell is. But yeah, I mean, Tyler Chappell beats him, loses to Nick O'Neill. Really, the highlight here for me was Mason Kiernan of Bethel Park. He had a phenomenal tournament. I really, really wanted to see him at 127 pounds. And look at the run he had. I mean, he loses to O'Neill in a tight match 4-2, but he beats David Kennedy from Montoursville, who's not bad at all. Beats Binney. He beats him 4-2. Loses in a crazy overtime match to Eden Cement from Council Rock North. That match could have went either way. And then he beats Tyler Chappell for 5th, beats him 5-1. Mason had a really, really good tournament. Another one that I just was really impressed with. And to be honest with you, 127, I mean, again, like we talked about with 114, it's anybody's. It really doesn't matter who you are because you're in the mix. I mean, Ethan Lieben, a state runner-up, was not a medalist here, 2-2. Right. Now he had a really tough draw. He loses to the guy who ended up taking 2nd in one of those, and he ended up losing to the guy who took 4th. So, I mean, Ethan Lieben, while yes, I'm sure he's disappointed, he did have a really tough draw, and POWERade's one of those tournaments where, you can catch 2 nationally ranked guys really quickly. Dom Ferraro, I thought, had a good tournament. He beat David Kennedy, but then he lost to Eden Cement. He was actually up in that match. I believe it was a 6-4 match at the time. Maybe it was 6-2. And Cement just takes him to his back and pins him. So Ferraro, I mean, for only going 2-2, it was a good 2-2 tournament for him. Yeah, man, 127 is nuts. It's probably the deepest weight class in the WPIAL from top to bottom, because you have at least like 8 guys here that are all guys that could potentially medal at the state tournament, and that's not an exaggeration.
And I know you mentioned that you were hoping that this tournament would provide some clarity. I don't know how much it did. I mean, you had Chappell
Yeah, I
beat
mean
Benny, you
it.
had
No,
Kernan
it
beat
did.
Chappell, but
I think it did provide some clarity for sure. I mean, from a ranking standpoint, I think it definitely provided some clarity for us. Um, yeah, you're always going to have those weird results where, um, head to heads, but common opponents. Like I may have beat you head to head, but I lost to a guy that you beat. There's always going to be some of that. But Mason Kiernan, I mean, the top finisher in the WPIAL, was the guy who was going to move up, right? I mean, and that's what happens. So, while it may not have been crystal clear, I was happy with the fact that I at least had some clarity. I had a lot more clarity than I did after the King of Mountain. I can tell you that.
133 pounds for the WPIAL. Maddox Shaw, Thomas Jefferson. He finished in third place. For PA, Dalton Perry of Central Mountain finished in second. Hayden Cunningham of State College in eighth. Shaw was the top seed coming in. He ended up losing in the quarterfinals 5-3 and then coming all the way back for third and beating Jackson Joy, the guy he lost to in the quarters.
Yeah, I got to talk to Maddox after he did finish in third, and he was ahead in that match. He was up 3-0 against Joy from Wadsworth, Ohio, and then he shut down, right, and ended up Joy came back on an escape and a takedown, and then a takedown in overtime to win it. But Maddox wasn't deterred. He kind of was like, all right, water off his back type thing, because he beat Jack Consiglio 2-1, which I thought was a huge win for him. And he ends up beating Joy. He was up, I think, 5-0 before he pinned him. So, yeah, I mean, Maddox certainly being the top seed, being a guy who was a runner-up here last year, I think overall he was a little disappointed, but this was a really tough weight class. My God, I mean, when you look at the national, just like 121, you've got some of the top guys in the nation here. So for Maddox Shaw, I don't think he's too overall disappointed. But man, it was a tough go for the WPIAL. Cooper Hornak goes 2-2, loses to Cade Brown from St. Ed's, another Brown from St. Ed's who just tore through the WPIAL. Cooper had a good win over Anthony Ferrara, though. That to me was an impressive win for him. He loses the Joy as well, 4-0. So again, it doesn't really matter because at POWERade you've got to be on every single match. Joe Simone, I thought, had a good tournament too. He was very close to beating Vincent Robinson, the guy who ended up winning it. Vince Robinson from Illinois was just, I mean, very, very close to losing that one. He ends up beating Dalton Perry. Simone, man, like, I don't know if he's 100% either, but he had, because he had a guy from Altoona, Caleb Fasik, who is just a little bit of a fire plug, man. He's so tough. He's like a fire hydrant. He's just really strong, short, and Simone only beat him 1-0. So I thought, this isn't probably looking good for him. But then he beats Dylan Granaham from Benton, a state medalist, beats him 3-1. Then he has that match with Vincent Robinson where he almost knocks him off. I'm like, okay, this is, but then I look at the bracket. Oh, you get Hayden Cunningham. 3-1 match. So, like Cooper Hornak, I would say for a 2-2, that was probably one of the toughest 2-2 brackets you're going to have in your career potentially.
Yeah, no doubt about that for sure. 139 pounds for the WPIAL. Only one medalist, and that was Eli Carr of Hempfield. He finished in 8th place. He dropped a decision in the 7th, 8th place match to Devin Magro of Bishop McCourt.
Yeah, and just like Mason Kiernan of Bethel Park, Eli Carr, I thought, had a phenomenal showing here. He was definitely the highlight for me at 139 pounds in a weight where, you had a guy like Pearson Manville who ended up not winning it, right? And Eli Carr lost to Pearson Manville 14-3. But he beat Ethan Kolb from Benton, which was a really good win for him. He beat Nico Farrer from Burrell. He beat him 4-0. Then he beat Nathan Stone from Franklin Regional 6-0. His biggest win, though, came against two-time state medalist and POWERade medalist Connor Saylor of Hickory. He ends up beating him 5-2 to make it into the medal round, where he loses to Spencer Barnhart and Devin Magro. That was a really big performance for Eli. I mean, for him to beat those those guys, Kolb, Farah, Stone, and Sailor. I mean, it was just like they got better and better. The wins just kept on getting better for him. That was a really big performance for him. So I know Coach Vince DeAugustine is happy with his performance. Probably a little disappointed in Ethan's, but Eli Carr was certainly a bright spot for him and the Spartans there.
And Blake Reener of Trinity, he ended up coming up 1 win shy as well. He lost to Sailor in the round of 16, and then he ended up losing to Magro in that win to get in. So 1 win away for Trinity's Blake Reener. 145 pounds, Waynesburg's Mac Church coming in as a top seed, upset in the semifinals. Falls to third place, did beat Vince Bozakis of Notre Dame GP for third. And also for the WPIAL, Nico Taddy of West Allegheny finishing in sixth place.
Yeah, I try not to pick favorites and have biases towards wrestlers, but man, I'm a big Mac Church fan. I like Mac a lot. Humble kid, really mature. And I'm a fan of Mac. I like him. I've always liked talking to him. I've just liked the way he's progressed over his career. I think he's, I think he sometimes has times when he reverts back to his freshman year where he's letting matches get too close. Excuse me. And I think that's what happened with Jaden Robinson. Jaden Robinson had a plan, and he executed it. And that was to do as little, and this is no shade on Jaden Robinson. I actually talked to Robinson after the tournament, and another very respectful young man. But he did everything in his power to not let Mac wrestle his match. There was multiple injury times. I think Robinson called injury time at least 3 or 4 times, or blood time. It was one of those matches where you're just like, what is going on here? Let them wrestle. Because if they wrestled a full, like an actual match, I think Mac Church wins that one 9 times out of 10, maybe 10 out of 10, because Mac is just that good. But Robinson just was not allowing. And this is, again, I mean, he had a plan, he executed it, and it worked. And in fact, Jaden Robinson ends up winning the tournament, beating Cam Catcherbone, nationally ranked guy. So Jaden Robinson, we know he's good. That's no doubt. But I just thought Mac Church, he got frustrated. He was clearly, he just couldn't get his offense going. The match kept on getting stopped. He never got into a rhythm. And Jaden Robinson he was so good at just game planning for that. And then for Mac, he came back. He could have tucked his tail between his legs and said, I was the top guy here. I'm looking for my second title here. But he didn't. He came back and wrestled strong. He beat a tough Asher Cunningham, and then he beat a guy who was the top ranked guy in AA, Vince Bozakis, a guy who won it here last year. So, for Mac, yeah, he's disappointed, I'm sure. But I would rather him take that loss here at POWERade than later down the road, like he did against Matt Repos at the state tournament his freshman year. So for Mac, I'm sure again he's disappointed, but still pretty good performance.
Yeah, no doubt about it, and I think you nailed it on the head. I mean, he definitely shut down at times. He talked a lot about his freshman year, right? And he came in with a lot of pressure, didn't he? I mean, when he started as a freshman, people were talking about him as a 4-timer, and how well is he going to,
even
including
before
us. Right? I think
even before he stepped foot into Hershey, people were talking about 4-timer this, 4-timer that. And I can remember when he wrestled Tyler Kasak for the first time at the state dual tournament, and everyone was like, "Whoa, maybe not," because he had been. I mean, he was an Ironman runner-up that year. He was a POWERade champion that year. He was just dominating guys, right? But you're right. I think the pressure. I think there's a lot of pressure. Sorry to cut you off. I want to go back to Nico Taddy whenever you're done talking about Mac.
No, and just to kind of summarize it, though, is I think he's his own worst enemy sometimes. He can definitely, if he gets after his offense and stays focused and game plan the way he usually does, he's going to win every single match. So I think as long as there's going to be guys like Robinson here, I think coming up in the state tournament that are going to frustrate him. They're gonna take the Robinson game plan. So I think now for Mac, it's just a matter of, okay, how do I change my approach when guys do this to me? And he
And
figures that out, he wins.
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I equate it to a lot of like with Vinny Kilkiri. I mean, think about Vinny and what he went through last year. Guys were trying to not wrestle him a lot of times, right? And he just couldn't. You go back to his match with Jack Russo, right? Everyone's saying, well, he's pushing Jack Russo all around. Well, you got to find a takedown. You can't just push him around and expect to bank on a stall call.
Calls.
So, Mac runs into the same thing where guys are going to shut down on you a little bit, right? So I see him and Vinny in very similar senses. At least the way people wrestle him. Going back to 145 at POWERade, Greg, Nico Taddy had a phenomenal tournament, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention him and the West Allegheny team. We're going to talk more about some other folks here in the next weight and the weight after that. But Nico, he's kind of like the third horseman here. I mean, he's the guy. All right, you got Ty Waters, you got Sean Taylor, and Nico Taddy. And Nico, my gosh, I think having that year off where he was injured. Because let's not forget, I mean, he was a medalist at the state tournament his freshman year, finished really high, finished in fourth. So Nico Taddy had a great tournament here, ends up beating a tough Chase Burke from Benton, beats him 1-0, then beats a guy who really impressed me, Ryan Lawler of Bish McDevitt, beats him 5-2, beats a guy from Wyoming Seminary, Smokey McClure, who really impressed me. And he beat him up 11-0. Then he loses two really tough matches. One, he lost to Vince Mazakis 3-1, and then he lost to Asher Cunningham 2-1. Those aren't bad losses at all. And for the second year in a row, Nico Taddy's on the medal stand here at POWERade.
And you mentioned his teammate Ty Waters. He had 152 pounds. He is the lone WPIAL medalist, but he was the champion. Waters winning 152.
Yeah, I mean, Ty, Ty's a good wrestler. He's a fun wrestler, man. I love watching Ty wrestle because you just never know what's going to happen, right? And he had a tough match in the quarterfinals. He wrestled Chris Crawford from Wyoming Seminary, and his quote to me was, "That dude's a dog. Like he's tough." And Crawford came back for third. Crawford probably, I mean, he was seated, I think, 8th. Probably should have been seated a little bit higher, right? Crawford had a really good tournament, only lost to Ty Waters in overtime. Ty ends up getting a takedown to win it. And I'm not going to say he cruised the rest of the way, but it certainly wasn't like last year, right, where he beat Finn Solomon in a match where, I would say he upset him and then loses in the finals to Shapiro. Ty Waters, man, West Virginia got themselves a good one there because he's a lot of fun, and I don't think we've seen quite the best yet. I think he's still just honing his skills and really, just developing. And the thing about his style is it's constantly evolving, right? He's never content. He's always finding ways to score, and he's just a lot of fun to watch too. So yeah, Ty Waters was certainly a shining light here at 152 pounds.
And Bodie Marlowe of Thomas Jefferson comes up one win shy. He lost to Crawford in the round of 16, and then he ended up losing 5-3 to Nate Rickards of Malvern Prep. So he was close to the award stand. 160 pounds for the WPIAL. Sean Taylor of West Allegheny, he finishes in third place, defeating Dylan Evans of Chartiers Valley. Evans finishing in fourth.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're going to talk about it a lot, but my gosh, Sean Taylor, he had himself a tournament, right? I'm a little disappointed because I wanted to see him versus Andrew Christie. Andrew Christie had to default out after the round of 16. Has a kind of a lingering injury that's been bothering him this year. I really wanted to see that match for a variety of reasons, but those two. Similar styles. They're I would say Sean's maybe a little bit, he's shorter, but Andrew Christie's really super strong for the weight. I was talking to Luke Sipes, and he said Andrew Christie's the strongest kid he's ever wrestled at M2. But Sean Taylor, man, you can't say enough about him. I mean, he beat Jacob Luquez 9-4, which was a good win. Then got that default over Christie. Loses to the top seed here and one of the top guys in the nation, number one across some publications, Joe Seeley of Wyoming Seminary, loses to him 7-3. I mean, I don't think he was too disappointed in that, because I think he kind of just thought, hey, let's go see what happens here. Beat a tough Reed Fulmer of Malvern Prep in the Conci semis, and then beat Dylan Evans in tiebreaker. And I would definitely encourage you to go back and watch that match if you haven't. That match could have went either way. And Dylan Evans, he knows when to peak, right? I mean, let's just put it this way: he didn't place at POWERade last year, ends up winning a state title. He places fourth here this year. It's yet to be seen what he's going to do in Hershey, but I hope these two continue to bang heads, because that was a fun match, or a lot of excitement around it. There was just a lot of, I think there's a lot of mutual respect between the both of them. They're not far from each other. They've trained together a little bit, I think it was a good thing to see those guys to lock horns in the POWERade, and Sean Taylor certainly proved that he's a force to be reckoned with. And he gave me a little jab in the interview afterwards about his state rankings. He was like, I came in ranked 6. I think the guy he was like number 1, I think. Yeah, Sean. Yeah, he was. I get it. But yeah, he had a good tournament.
So is he the new number 1, Jeff?
He's not quite yet. And I'm surprised he hasn't sent me a message saying, like, I beat the state champ and I can't get to the number 1 spot. He's number 2 right now. Nick Hoonsteck of Pottsville, who was at Blair last year, who actually had a win over Dylan Evans at the POWERade. He was the runner-up at POWERade last year. He's now at Pottsville. He's the top-ranked guy. I'm sure. I'm really surprised I haven't heard anything from Sean yet.
Well, hey, 6-2, we're getting closer, I guess, to that number 1 spot. So 172 pounds, your champion was from the WPIAL. Rocco Welsh of Waynesburg gets that elusive POWERade title that he had been missing. Also for the WPIAL, though, a strong tournament. Matthew Furman of Cannon McMillan finishes in 3rd place. Bodie Morgan of Trinity in 7th place.
This was a huge bracket for the WPIAL. I mean, obviously we knew Rocco was going to do what Rocco does. We know how good Rocco is, but this was the last infinity stone for him, man. He had won everything up until this point, right? I mean, going back to his 9th grade, winning the Surge, winning the Ironman, winning the Super 32, winning at Who's Number 1. He had just not, he had not won POWERade yet. He had finished 2nd to Alejandro, and this was his year, right? And I think he was happy to get that monkey off his back. But it was almost overshadowed a little bit by Matt Furman, because Matt Furman had himself a tournament. My God, I mean, he went off, and it was not an easy road by any stretch. I mean, he had Delegata, the younger one, in the round of 16, I believe, beat him 4-2. Loses to Federici from Wyoming Seminary. A really good match, 5-2. Federici's a guy I got to see a lot of this over his career. And then he beats Duncan Christensen, a really, really tough sophomore for Malvern Prep, who was a Fargo All-American. And then he ends up getting a really big win over Holden Garcia. This is definitely the biggest win of his career, at least inside of Pennsylvania. Beats a state champ in Holden Garcia 3-2. It was a crazy match. He scored on a takedown, and then he almost gave up a takedown, but was able to just roll out through it, and it was impressive. He looked great. And then he avenges that loss to Federici to take 3rd. So huge performance and huge tournament for Matt Furman, a guy who he missed the Ironman due to injury. Wasn't able to wrestle at Super 32 due to that injury. So he seems to be back on track. And you got to look at Bodie Morgan and say, he's getting there too. I think he's almost back on track. Bodie had a really good tournament after an early round loss. And, he looked, I think he ran through 4 or 5 guys in the Conci. He lost his first match to Gage Wright, of Parkersburg, who ended up making it to the finals there against Rocco Welsh. But Bodie Morgan loses that first one, rattles off 4 straight wins, including a win over Lucas Lawler of Bish McDevitt, loses to Delegata. But I'm impressed with him. And, overall, the WPIAL I thought had a good showing despite those 3. Nathan Campbell from Norwin I thought had a good tournament as well, beat Carter Weaveling of State College. He went 2-2, lost to Duncan Christensen. But, Rocco Welsh headliner, Matt Furman spoiler.
189 pounds for the WPIAL. Rune Lawrence of Fraser finishes in 6th place. He had the medical forfeit in the semifinals and then forfeited all the way down. Brody Evans of Waynesburg finishing in 8th place. For Lawrence, he did end up, and we'll talk about this here in a little bit, but he did wrestle in the dual meet against Mount Pleasant for Fraser yesterday. So he is back on the mats, but his coach Buck Watkins mentioned he's not 100%. He's probably about 80% right now with, I think he's a hand injury that he's dealing with.
Yeah.
But decided to forfeit out, and probably the best move at this point, obviously focusing on the postseason.
Yeah, I mean, fans were disappointed, right? I mean, they wanted to see the Delegata match in the semifinals, and if he had won, they wanted to see that rematch with Carrera of Wyman Seminary. But you're right, he had to make the right choice for him and his future, and his future goal is winning a state title, not necessarily a POWERade title. Although I know he wants one because he hasn't got one yet. He lost in the finals as a freshman. And took 4th last year to Welsh. I definitely think he made the right choice. It's a hand injury that's just kind of lingering. And, like you said, he was back on the mat for their duel against Mount Pleasant, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But, yeah, I mean, Rune wrestled well up to that point. He tech-falled Brody Evans, right? And Brody Evans ends up coming back and take 8th here. Brody Evans had a good win over Rocco Serafini of Central Mountain. He beat him 5-2, which was a good win for him. But overall, Waynesburg, I think they're slowly chipping away. We'll talk up at 215 about Makel, but, man, they're starting to get back in the groove, I think, a little bit.
Speaking of 215, the WPIAL was loaded here in the top 8. Obviously headlined by Eli Makel of Waynesburg, coming in as the number 7 seed, ends up finishing in 2nd place, losing to Austin Johnson of Muncie 8-3 in the final. Corey Borio of Latrobe finished in 4th, Connor Jacobs of Armstrong in 5th, Brennan Morgan of Central Valley in 6th.
So this was a huge weight for the WPIAL, obviously, when you look at the number of medalists here. But really, I mean, it starts with Makel, right? He was able to make it to the finals. He was the 7th seed, upset the number 2 and the number 6 seed to get to the finals. Danny Church was the 3rd seed. He was beat by the 6th. So Makel has a strong run to the finals, and then he keeps it very close with Austin Johnson, who literally has majored or teched or pinned every single one of his opponents up to that point. So that in itself is a victory, right? Austin Johnson was a state runner-up last year, nationally ranked, number 1 in the state by a mile, and Makel was able to keep it to a decision 8-3. And actually afterwards I talked to Johnson, and Johnson was like, yeah, I mean, that dude was really good. He was strong, and he looks big, right? The interesting part here was the rest, because Corey Borio ended up finishing the top of the rest, but it wasn't easy. Connor Jacobs had a good tournament, but he just had a kind of a lapse there in the Consi round against Borio. He was winning in that match, or it may have been actually no, it was tied. It was tied when they went to ultimate tiebreaker or tiebreaker 2, and Borio ended up getting the escape to win it. But it was a great tournament for the WPIAL, because if you look at it, Corey Borio, he avenges a loss to Danny Church, a guy he had lost to at the Hickory tournament, loses. So Corey loses to Brendan Morgan in the 2nd round. And that was a crazy match. 4-2 was the final. Borio was up 2-0 to start. And then Brendan Morgan, and let's not forget, Brendan Morgan's up from 189. Brendan Morgan had been at 89 up until the POWERade, where he came up to 215. And clearly it was a good choice for him, because he looked really good. Beats Borio, but then ends up losing to Corrado of Wyman Seminary, and then loses to Jacobs. So, and actually lost to Jacobs twice. So Jacobs ends up coming back and losing after losing to Austin Johnson, loses to Borio, then beats Morgan. So it was just again, like 114, like 127, I needed this to kind of see where they're all at, right? And Corey Borio has proven, okay, I'm at least I'm right there. Eli Makel, though, he made a statement. Eli Makel made a huge statement that he's not only one of the top guys in WPIAL, he's one of the top guys in the state, without a doubt.
Yeah, and definitely separated himself from that pack of Borio and Jacobs at this point in the season. 285 pounds for the WPIAL. Ty Banco of Trinity finishes in 4th place. Joey Schneck of Pine Richland finishing in 6th place.
So Banco, I mean, he had a good tournament. If you look how deep this weight was, and it was really deep, with Riley Robel, state champ, finishing second to the number 1 guy in the nation, Jimmy Mullen. Ty Banco loses to Mullen and loses to Pavlechko of State College, a guy who I'm a huge fan of, number 2 in the state. Ty Banco had a good tournament nonetheless. And, for Schneck, again, he's a guy who's come on strong for Pine Richland, a guy who has now dedicated himself to wrestling. He ends up going 4-3, loses to Pavlechko, but he beats Wyatt Held, a guy he had lost to last year. So he had lost to Held in last season, and he ends up pinning him after going up 1-0. So I think that shows his progression throughout at least the last 6 months.
Overall, for the POWERade Tournament for the WPIAL, they finished with 25 medalists, 2 champions, Rocco Welsh and Ty Waters, but 25 total medals for the WPIAL here in the POWERade Tournament. You look at the other tournaments, Jeff, we talked a lot about Southmoreland last week, so we'll just move ahead to the Trojan Wars, where obviously Burgestown took a crack there, the only WPIAL school out that way. They come home with 3 medals total.
Yeah, and we expected St. Paul's to do well, but Rudy Brown had himself a tournament at 152 pounds. And if you look at the guys here, Cameron Milheim was 3rd, guy who was a Fargo All-American, nationally ranked. Michael Dugan, we all know about Michael Dugan, he was 5th. Rudy Brown was 8th, and he lost to Nolan Ziegler of West Perry in that 7th and 8th place matchup. Ziegler is a guy who was a state medalist 2 years ago. So Rudy Brown, I thought, had a really good tournament. Both St. Paul's finished in 7th here. The Trojan Wars is a very deep tournament. It just doesn't have, their best teams are not from Pennsylvania. They're from outside of the state. Virginia sends a whole bunch of top teams, Maryland, West Virginia as well. But yeah, Parker takes 7th at 121 pounds behind guys from Pennsylvania. Lucas Fye was the champion there. Jackson Rush was 2nd. So kind of gauges where you're at a little bit. And then Joey took 7th at 139 pounds. Again, Regan Milheim was 2nd there. Ty Morrison from West Perry was 4th. Mason Barvitsky, 2-time state medalist, was 6th. And St. Paul, again, maybe the guys we were expecting to be there, but Rudy Brown, I thought, had a good tournament.
You look at some of the results from this past week as far as dual meets go to this point. In AAA, a couple of results that came in. North Allegheny defeated Pine Richland 41-19. You also had Plum beating Fox Chapel 39-18. AA, Quaker Valley over Montour 29-28 in a close battle there. But the other big one too, Fraser knocks off Mount Pleasant 38-33.
Yeah, I mean, so those I mean, that was the biggest one in Double-A for me, Fraser and Mount Pleasant, and Buck Watkins was right. I mean, I remember at the beginning of the year he was like, "Man, we're going to beat Mount Pleasant," and I didn't doubt him, but we got to see the team first, right? And they end up beating them, right? That was a really good duel for them. That's a marquee win for them. For a team that a few years ago only had a handful of wrestlers to now having a full lineup and beating a team like Mount Pleasant. There was a lot of big performances in that one. Tyler Clark at 127, getting a win over Sean Kane 4-2 was really, to me, like a deciding factor. I thought that was a toss-up match, and for Clark to come out with the win there was really big. And then their other guys got falls, right? Celestia got a fall at 60, Erdley got a fall at 52, and of course Rune got a fall at 89. Jackson Angelo, another guy who's come on really strong. he got a fall at 72. So their big guns end up getting some big results here, and it just was not enough. Mount Pleasant just did not have enough to kind of counter that. So yeah, that was a huge win, and also Latrobe beat Hempfield. That was a big win for Latrobe. Vinny Kilkeary's back, which I know a lot of people are excited about. Potentially, especially now with the Westmoreland County coming up, the Westmoreland County tournament this weekend. So yeah, that was a big win for the Wildcats to kind of get back on track. And the other good thing is Nathan Roth weighed in. He didn't wrestle, but he's apparently weighing in, so that's good. We didn't get to see a Kilkeary and Lieben match, which we could potentially see this weekend. So, but yeah, another good sectional battle between these two foes.
And as far as this coming weekend, Jeff, we got a lot of action. You referenced to it, the Westmoreland County tournament taking place at Greensburg-Salem High School. All the Westmoreland County teams obviously participating there. Tri-counties, so you have Washington, Greene, and Fayette will be wrestling at Cannon-McMillan High School. So those two tournaments are both Friday and Saturday. And then on Saturday, you also have essentially what you would consider the Beaver County tournament. It's the Ed Driscoll Mac tournament. It's essentially Beaver County, and then you throw in Quaker Valley and West Allegheny and a couple other schools like Carlinton. But essentially it's mostly all Beaver County schools at the Mac tournament. So all of those essentially county tournaments going on this weekend. Allegheny County is usually the one standalone, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. Also going on this weekend is the Bow Wood tournament. So some schools from Allegheny County and Indiana County, participating in that one as well. And Connellsville also wrestling in a dual meet tournament where they'll see the likes of Blair Academy and St. Christopher's, and Christiansburg. So they got quite a slate coming up, but a lot of good wrestling coming up this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, the counties are like kind of the last for a lot of these teams. It's one of their last individual tournaments before really getting into the meat of the dual meet tournaments. And at least in the WPIAL, right? It changes from district to district, but we've already seen some big results from some of our state ranked teams. Fraser getting that big win over Mount Pleasant. The WPIAL, I mean, you talk about clarity. I mean, we certainly don't have any more clarity that we did to start POWERade. We certainly don't have any more clarity with the team stuff. Vinny Kilkeary being back obviously is big for Latrobe, but Trinity, shout out to Hilders for the shirt. But Trinity's got to get their guys healthy, right? They got to get the Allisons, they got to get TJ Allison back. They got to get some guys healthy and geared up and ready to go for the team postseason, because they're gonna be a tough team should they get healthy. Same with Waynesburg, and again, don't sleep on West Allegheny. So it's gonna be. I mean, it hasn't been this open in years. So it's gonna be a lot of fun, Greg.
And you could even talk about AA too. I mean, obviously Burrell takes the cake most years, and you have Quaker Valley coming back as the reigning champs. You got Burgestown, who's been a threat the last couple of years and has done really well. So you got those teams, but then you throw in some wrinkles, right? To see who else might be able to get into the mix. As far as a Fraser, Mount Pleasant, McGuffey, what schools are going to be able to climb into the mix as well. So AA to me, I mean, Burrow is the team, right? That you would say is the top dog right now going in, because they always have to be the favorite, I think. But Burgestown is right there with them, and after that, though, I mean, I think it's still wide open AA too.
Yeah, I mean, this Fraser win really kind of throws a wrench into things, because you're right. I mean, I would say Burrell is the team, but Burgestown's not far behind. Quaker Valley's they haven't quite. I think they lost a lot more than I expected, and they also have a tough schedule too, right? They're wrestling a lot of AAA teams. But Fraser, I mean, with that win, they're in the mix, right? I mean, they have to be in the mix after that win. And AAA, it's just, my gosh, between Waynesburg, Connellsville, Candimac, West Allegheny, Butler, Latrobe, Hempfield. I mean, it's all of it. It's a mess, right? I mean, it's gonna be fun. I don't envy Phil Mary and the rest of the WPIAL steering committee to on seeding there, because you're like, toss them up and figure it out, right? But yeah, it's wide open for sure.
the section tournaments will provide a lot of clarity for that, I think.
No, I mean they do,
You're
and
going
they
to
will.
get your section champs, and from there, it's just about how you kind of seed some of those champs and how you look at those December results, which we know they look at, but they also look at the lineups too,
They
because like
do.
we talked about, Waynesburg didn't have guys against Butler. Same with Latrobe not having guys against Trinity, so they'll look at all of that stuff and see if that score would have been any different with those guys in the lineup. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, Trinity runs the gauntlet and beats Waynesburg, they're going to be the top seed. They
Uh,
lose to Waynesburg, then it gets a little bit more dicey.
right. And what about Canamac? I mean, Canamac could have, they could end up beating Trinity and then beating Waynesburg. I
They could be in both, yeah.
so I mean, it's just it's kind of bonkers, right? Butler in the North is definitely the team. I think after seeing them compete and just dominate the Southmoreland tournament as a individual tournament, but also seeing them in the dual meets, I think Butler's is clearly the team up top. But in the South and the West and the East, West Allegheny out in the West is I think one of the top teams. But I mean, it's going to be fun to see in both classes.
Yeah, and obviously as far as individual rankings go, we'll get I know you got some clarity, Jeff, at POWERade, but you'll get some more here with the county tournaments here coming up this weekend. So should be able to hopefully get those rankings all sorted out by the end of this weekend.
I normally do, Greg. I normally get them sorted. It's coming together, man. The rankings are coming together. There was a lot of changes. We got 3 number ones in AAA. There was a lot more movement in AAA than there was AA. But this is there's my favorite times to rank are after like the weekend of King of the Mountain and then after like POWERade, because there's so many head-to-head matchups. There's so many common opponents that you're just not going to see, and yeah, I love it, and I think the rankings right now are very reflective of the state landscape and how how it is looking as of January 5th, 2023.
Well, join us next week. We'll recap the county tournaments. We'll talk more about some dual meets that take place, and continue to set straight as we continue to look ahead and try our best to get ready for the team tournament and then the individuals coming up right after. So, for Jeff Upson, I'm Greg Warnock. We appreciate you listening and watching in to War Up on the WPIAL.